It's so fun because we spend so much of our life programming to deadlines and programming in things you already know. Coming to a conference like this really tends to recharge my batteries because I get exposed to new ideas and new languages and new frameworks, and it makes me excited to go back to work and take advantage of some of the things I've learned. So this is a real luxury that you've been here all day, and I hope you've enjoyed it and made the most of it.
Please welcome Scott Davis to present the session on modern workflow for modern web apps.
Thank you. Hey, you clapped too soon. You don't know if this is going to be a good talk or not. You should have waited to see if you're going to enjoy it or not. No, this is the last talk of the day for me, but I'll be back tomorrow talking about RESTful web services and Grails, and then Groovy testing is another talk I'm going to be doing tomorrow. But Yeoman is something that I've called out to in almost every one of my presentations. And if you come back for the workshops on Friday, I'm going to have a full half-day workshop on the mean stack, on Mongo, Express, Node, Angular, all these kinds of things. And Yeoman is going to play a significant part in that as well. So, if I haven't had a chance to meet you yet, my name is Scott Davis. I run a consultancy company called thirstyhead.com. And one of the things I'm very excited about is that all the presentations I'm doing are now in HTML5 and available to you online. If you go to my.thirstyhead.com, you'll get an opportunity to see all the talks that I've given today. And tonight I'll go and upload my talks for tomorrow. I mentioned in my last presentation, the good news is all my slides are in HTML5 and I can offer them to you free online. The bad news is many of my older slide decks are in Keynote and PowerPoint and other things, so I'm having to go through and convert my slide decks to HTML5 and to publish them here. But I do promise you that all of my Groovy and Grails talks from tomorrow will be up here as well. There's really not a lot to show you in that half-day workshop because what we're going to do is do a lot of live coding to demonstrate to you what's going on. But if you're interested in these slides as well, they're right up here at my.thirstyhead.com. So, Yeoman. I mentioned this book in an earlier presentation today, Small Pieces Loosely Joined. This is a book written by an author named David Weinberger. And he wrote this a number of years ago. He was trying to explain the web when the web was still fairly new. And this turn of phrase, this metaphor, small pieces loosely joined, obviously has really stuck with me. It's a wonderful metaphor for what we do as web developers today. Because if you think about it, you're not going to go out and write your own credit card processing API. You're not going to go out and write your own mapping framework. You're not going to go out and write your own YouTube, are you? Maybe you are. Yeah? But chances are very good you're going to write a mashup that combines YouTube and Google Maps and PayPal and begin assembling these things together. Our job as web developers these days, we still write a lot of code, but the code we write ends up being glue code to string these various libraries together. That's what small pieces loosely joined really means. So, what does all that have to do? This is not my slide clicker. There we go. What does all that have to do with Yeoman? Well, Node.js, you see what I did? I didn't answer that question. Don't worry, I will. What does that have to do with Yeoman? Did you mention Node.js? No, I didn't, Scott. Who brought up Node.js? You brought up Node.js. Okay. Well, Node.js is another brilliant example of small pieces loosely joined. NPM, the Node package manager, makes it incredibly easy for you to go out and install various different modules. And I want you to notice how many packages there are. Close to 70,000. It's incredible. Just last year when I would pull up this slide deck, I'd say, isn't it cool that they have 20,000 modules? And then midway through the year, I said, isn't it amazing that they've got 35,000 modules? So we can see that not only is this number going up, it's going up at almost an exponential rate. But the idea here is from Node.js. I had folks asking me, all right, how would I integrate Node.js with Mongo? So if I come in here and type in MongoDB, what I'm going to see are a number of different plugins that would help me integrate with MongoDB. But if I said, no, really, I'm not interested in Mongo, I'm interested in CouchDB, I can come in here and find a similar set of utilities that will help me integrate with Couch. And if I wanted to integrate with Oracle, I could come in here and type in Oracle and begin seeing a number of connectors for that. So the idea here is, once again, being able to find these modules, be able to find these things that will help you along your way. So, what does Node.js have to do with Yeoman? I'm so glad you asked. What we're going to end up with here is complete chaos, right? This is what it looks like when you're trying to evaluate 69,000 different NPM modules. Here's what I'd recommend you do. Start with a spreadsheet and then have a number of columns going across the type for all of your decision criteria. And then put in 69,000 rows, and then you can evaluate. Does that make sense? Is that the easiest way to do these kinds of things? Yeah. No, it can be very overwhelming trying to figure out what all these different tools do. And this brings to mind another book, not Small Pieces Loosely Joined, but The Paradox of Choice. And that's another really kind of intriguing title, why less is more. Now, or why more is less. I was going to say the traditional phrase is less is more, but he says why more is less, turning that around. He gives several examples in this book about how there were small grocery store that was selling high-end gourmet jams and jellies and chutneys and things like that. And they started out just by putting 2 or 3 little jars out and maybe a little pile of crackers over there. And they found that when they gave 3 samples out, sales went up. And they said, aha, we've uncovered the secret, right? If putting out 3 jams increased sales, what do you think would happen if we put out 30 jams? And if putting out crackers increased sales, what do you think would happen if we put out crackers and bread and pretzels and all kinds of things like that? And interestingly enough, what happened is sales went down. And not just down to their benchmark, to their baseline, it went down below where they were before they had started offering any samples at all. And when they started asking the people, why is this happening, they said, you know, if there were 3 jams and jellies out, I could deal with that. I could stop and I could make a choice between one of 3 jams. I'd spread it, have a little bit. So that's good, and go along my way. By the time they had 30 jams out and 15 different crackers and cookies and biscuits and things like that, someone looked at that spread and they said, I'm overwhelmed. I don't have time for that. I don't have time for a meal, right? I'm here to do my grocery shopping. And so they skipped it entirely. And that can be your experience if you're looking at Node.js and all 69,000 plugins. That can be your experience if you're trying to get started with client-side MVC and you have to decide, well, should I use Angular, or should I use Backbone, or should I use Ember, or should I use Knockout, or should I use JS MVC, or should I? By the time you're presented with so many different options, you might get overwhelmed and say, look, I don't want to use any of them because I simply don't have the time. So what we're beginning to see is with all of this explosion in complexity, we need tools that are going to help us manage that complexity as well. We need tools that are going to help us with integration. We need tools that are going to help us make recommendations for us. Things like that. I told you of when I was getting started with the mean stack. What initially drew me to mean.io is it was a single zip file that I could unzip, and it had the pieces already integrated for me. And while that was a good first step, it was also the last step of that project as well. Because once you unzip a zip file, what happens if you want to upgrade an individual piece of it? Or what happens if you want to swap out one piece and replace it with something else? You're back to dealing with a lot of these kinds of things. So what Yeoman offers us, I told you I'd get to Yeoman eventually. What Yeoman offers us is the ability to not only bootstrap very quickly, overcome that initial inertia, but you can also use Yeoman throughout the application process. So it's not just a one-time tool, it becomes an integral part of your development process. So that is what we're here to talk about today, Yeoman, and how you can use it to increase your developer velocity and really help you with those kinds of integration issues. Because Yeoman is not tied to any one framework or any one database. So you've got Yeoman tools for Couch, for Mongo, for Cassandra, for Oracle. You've got Yeoman Generators for Backbone, for Reveal, for Deck.js, for different things like that. So what you end up with is an extensible framework that helps you bring a lot of these disparate pieces together and can make it a little less overwhelming and a little less scary. So, plus Yeoman's got a cute logo as well, right? That's always important when you're choosing your tools. So if we go looking at Yeoman up there, they can say that what we're dealing with here is a web scaffolding tool for modern web apps. So scaffolding is very nice, and this is actually something that Josh mentioned in passing as we were moving along. He's like, I'm not a big fan of code generators, and I'm not trying to misquote you at all, but I agree with you that if this was a code generator, I would get very, very concerned. What this really is more of a code enabler or a scaffolding app. It allows you to lay out a directory structure and put the right classes in the right directory and to do these kinds of things. It's not writing your app for you, but what it's doing is it's scripting away a lot of the boring, mundane, non-value-adding tasks. So this is not so much a code generator as it is a developer enabler to speed away the mundane, boring stuff and allow you to focus on what you're really trying to do, which is solve real business problems. So Yeoman has a number of different generators out there. They've got generators for Angular and Backbone and Angular and 400 others out there. So what's really nice about this is once you install Yeoman, and it's interesting that we have to use NPM, Yeoman is predicated on you having Node.js installed. And this also brings up an interesting point, because so many people say, no, wait a second, I thought Node.js was a web server. I said, no. Node.js is a JavaScript runtime. Node.js is much closer to the JVM, the Java Virtual Machine, or the Java Runtime Environment, the JRE, than it is to Tomcat, or JBoss, or Geronimo, or WebSphere, or WebLogic. There are a whole host of tools that we're going to be using here. Grunt, Bower, a whole series of other tools that come along with it. JavaScript minifiers, Uglify.js, concatenators, JS Hint and JS Lint, all these various things. All of them require Node.js, not from a web server perspective, but from allowing you to run these command line tools from the command line. The only difference is they aren't Windows batch files, they aren't shell scripts, they are JavaScript files. So Node.js allows you to run JavaScript, a command line. Whew, falling over here. It's the end of the day, I'm very tired. You can also see what time it is in Denver. So I'm just waking up now. I'm in the mood for my coffee right now. So So this is where we're going. Yeoman is a scaffolding application, but it's an extensible scaffolding application, generators for over 400 different projects out there. So this isn't a web framework, but it will allow you to work with any web framework you happen to be dealing with. That is the catch. So, I mentioned this earlier, but this is what we're dealing with right now. I got flies buzzing around me as well. It's early in the morning. I'm ready for my morning shower, right? Then I wouldn't have flies buzzing around me. So Yeoman is the scaffolding portion of this. You'll type in Yo Reveal to get started with Reveal.js. Yo Backbone to deal with Backbone. Yo Ember. Yo Angular. These are all the generators that we were talking about. We'll give you an example of some of those in there. Grunt is your build script. So if you're a Java developer, you're familiar with Ant or Maven. Ant is to Java as Grunt is to JavaScript, as Rake is to Ruby, as Make is to C. So not only do we have a scaffolder now and we have a build tool available to us, we have Bower. NPM is how we deal with server-side dependencies. NPM install Express, or NPM install Mongoose, or NPM install these server-side JavaScript libraries that we need. Bower allows us to do the same thing for client-side libraries. So I can say Bower install jQuery. I can say Bower install Backbone, or Bower install underscore, or Bower install AngularJS. So Bower is a library that allows me to bring in client-side, browser-side dependencies. So talk about small pieces loosely joined, right? Yeoman is itself 3 separate projects that they've bundled together and shipped out to handle all of those kinds of things. Now, if you don't like Grunt, if you'd prefer to use Gulp, or you'd prefer to use Volo, you'd prefer to use another one of those other scripting libraries, you certainly can, but there is some nice symmetry between all these things. They are all kind of written by the same contributors. The core contributors bounce among the various projects. So these projects do have kind of a natural affinity for each other. But you will see that Yeoman is not standing still by any stretch of the imagination. And so one of the things, let's see here, let's look at their generators here. I don't want to learn how to write a generator. I want to see your generators. Well, let's... I don't have a brain, I've got Google, right? So let's do this. Let's do Yeoman Generators. I saw it come up here. There we go. Oh, that's where I ended up before. All right, let's go over to Community Generators. I didn't want to be in the Community Generator. There's the official generators. That's where I want to be. I'll get there eventually. I wanted to take you here because these official generators are generators that are written by the Yeoman team. It's not that they're better, but you certainly would expect that people who are writing the tools and writing the generators would have a good, deep understanding of all the gotchas that they come in there. And the reason I brought you here is certainly you'll have generators for Node and Ember and jQuery and things like that. But the very first generator they list is a Gulp generator. And Gulp.js is a new scripting library that is getting a lot of buzz and a lot of excitement. It would be kind of a replacement for Grunt. Grunt's got a lot of market share right now, but there are a lot of people that are excited about Gulp. So at some point in the future, we might find that Yeoman allows you to use either Gulp or Grunt interchangeably based on these kinds of things. But again, out of all the different libraries that are out there, it's helpful knowing that the folks who are interested in Yeoman are interested in Gulp as well. I can use that as a proxy to kind of gauge my interest as well. So as we're beginning to see the kinds of frameworks they're supporting, it gives me an idea that, okay, yeah, Mocha isn't a scary choice. Out of all the 69,000 plugins in there, Mocha is a decent testing choice. But I also see they support Jasmine. And at some point up here, I also saw they saw Karma. Those are 3 different JavaScript-based testing libraries. So I begin using these kinds of things as a proxy for me to evaluate different libraries. Out of all the different testing libraries out there, if I've got a couple of different generators, it'll not only make it easier for me to get that first success and build confidence, it's just as simple as doing yo Karma, yo Jasmine, yo Mocha, and having all the dependent libraries bundled in place, everything I need right there to very quickly evaluate those. So you begin seeing that these generators are a very powerful concept for a lot of different reasons. Now, this idea of scaffolding certainly wasn't invented by the JavaScript community. One of the reasons I like Grails so much is I don't have to think too hard about this. I can say Grails create app, and it's going to scaffold out a directory for me. I can say Grails create domain class, and it's not only going to give me a domain class, it's going to create a corresponding unit test for me and put them all in the right directory. I can say Grails create controller, and it's going to create a controller for me. Again, this isn't code generation. This is boring, mundane, repetitive things that I would have ended up writing a script to script away, but thankfully my framework gave it to me. And I'm using Grails as an example here. Certainly Rails does very similar kinds of things. But what do you do when you start wanting to deal with Express and it doesn't have that same command line tool? What do you deal with when you're dealing with Ember, or you're dealing with Angular and they don't have these kinds of things? This is why this third-party generator becomes so appealing. So the usage would end up looking something like this. I would type in yo web app, and it's going to scaffold out an application for me. Then I could type in Bower install _, and that would pull in a client-side library for me. Then I would type in Grunt, and it would launch a server for me. So let's come in here and see if we can do some of these kinds of things. I'll do as much live demoing as I can, as long as the internet cooperates with me. If not, I've got some canned examples I can show you as well. But let's do a simple web app right here. So I'll come in here, I'll type in web app, and once again, this is a nice empty directory, nothing up my sleeve, we're starting from scratch. But I am going to type in yo web app, and what Yeoman says, see, you've even got cute little ASCII art right there, yeah? But it says, what would you like? Would you like Sass? No, I'm not a Sass guy. Oh, but Bootstrap. Yeah, Twitter Bootstrap. I definitely like that. Modernizer? Sure. So I can come in here and pick and choose which of these additional libraries that I would like. And once I've picked and chosen, it's going to go out and assemble this application for me. It's going to use NPM to pull in all the server-side requirements that I need. And then after NPM is done running, it's going to turn around and use Bower to pull in all the client-side applications that I need. Now, this is a little bit of a kitchen sink app, but again, what's really nice is it gives you so many different libraries all pulled together. You can at least use this to evaluate which libraries you like and which you don't. You don't have to use this generator. There are 399 other ones that you can begin playing around with. But this one, once it's done running, he says, let me kind of come up here and show you all the things that it's pulled down. So it's pulled down Grunt, and Grunt had a bunch of dependencies that came along with that. It pulled down Uglify for our minification. It pulled down Modernizer. It pulled down Mocha for testing. It's doing some image minification. Yeah, I was worried this was going to happen to me. You can see it got started, and it pulled down a lot of good things, but now I'm kind of stuck. So we can come back to that in a moment. There we go. Oh, yeah. What is it airing out? Yeah, GitHub timed out on me here. So that's fine. GitHub timed out. But we can see what it ended up giving me at this point. It ended up giving me a nice directory structure. If I came in here and kind of nosed around a little bit in my web app, we can see that one of the things it gave me was an index.html file. An index.html that pulls in, well, if you're using something less than IE7, then we'll pull in this library. If you're less than IE8, we'll do this. It's pulling in a lot of things. Our viewport tag, making this mobile friendly. It's bringing in Bootstrap CSS because I asked for it to. It's bringing in Modernizer.js because I asked for it as well. And we can see that it gave us a simple little application. Now I'm going to try to run it, but since it didn't fully install, I don't know if this will fully run or not. But let's find out. Let's come in here and say Grunt. There we go, and we're, oh, it's testing it right now. Here, we don't need to test. Let's see. Let's do a Grunt server. It's trying to launch. Yeah, it didn't fully install, so that's not fair. Let me try one more time to pull down everything we needed. Okay, the npm install seemed to come down okay. Let me do a Bower install. Let me see if it was client side. That cached. All right. Well, while that thing is spinning there, I don't put a lot of hope in that. You begin seeing what we did here. Webapps pulled down a bunch of different libraries for us, and it did all the integration for us. I can then use Bower to begin installing a number of different client-side libraries that I needed, and then I could type in Grunt to test and concatenate and minify and even launch a server to do those kinds of things. That's not a bad ROI for just typing in a couple of commands. Now, here's another thing that we could do if you wanted to deal with Angular. You know, Yeoman requires you to install these kinds of things. I already had that web app generator installed, but if I didn't have this Angular generator, I'd have to use npm to install the generator. But then I could say yo Angular, and it would pull down all the resources in that generator. I could say Bower install Angular UI, and I could use Bower to install a number of these kinds of things. Grunt test, Grunt serve, Grunt dist. So you begin seeing your workflow build up through these three tools. And it is a little bit of a bummer that I have to use Yo some of the time, and Grunt some of the time, and Bower some of the time. But in fact, that's just the nature of having those three libraries out there. And I was using all three of those libraries independently. So it doesn't bother me because I'm like, well, yeah, Grunt is my build script, so I'm going to say Grunt this. It wouldn't bother me either to say git clone and then Grails create app and then git commit. Because they're two different tools doing two very different things. Git, of course, is my source control, and Grails is my web framework. So having these highly cohesive tools that do one and only one thing, yeah, you pay the price a little bit having to learn a couple different tools, but each tool does exactly what it needs to do. So scaffolding, build, it'll compile CoffeeScript if you have it. It'll link your scripts, preview server, image optimization, all these things it slices, it dices. Right? These are a lot of the kinds of things that you ought to be doing as a web developer. And having a generator just drop them down on you like that makes things nice and easy. So normally I try to do lots of live demoing out of this. We'll have to see if the internet will cooperate with us. But let's see some other examples of what we can do. As I said, you need to npm install yo, and that G flag installs it globally. And it would install it into your local application. By throwing that G flag, it's going to install globally so you can use it anywhere. So you would definitely want to install yo globally so you could turn around and type in yo reveal. The same is true with your generators. You'd want to install your generators globally so you can install them on an individual package-by-package basis. So this is what we did, make dir test, cd test, and yo web app. So that's how you would scaffold these things out. We can walk through here and see all the various things that it brings along for the party. And we could normally serve it up. Did it come back or did it fail again? Yeah, GitHub must think that I am trying to do a denial of service on them. That must be it. So I apologize. But we will get an opportunity. We'll let GitHub settle down and join us. This is what you would see when it launched. You'd see, hello, mate, always a pleasure scaffolding your apps for you. I've got a very terrible British accent. But that is what you would get out of the box in Yo Web App. So we could go in there and customize it a little bit, and that's the idea, being able to go in and customize these kinds of things. It's not moving the goalposts. That would be cheating. What it's doing is it's moving the starting line. It's getting you closer to the goalposts so you can begin writing your apps and not doing boring things like creating directories and renaming files. So let's take a step-by-step look at these things. These are the basic files that come down, and these are the files that you should be interested in. So we'll walk through them one by one and kind of identify what they're doing. The first one, and arguably the most important one, is package.json. I mentioned this as well in my mean talk, but this package.json has very quickly become the standard file that you're looking for when you're doing this kind of web development. Because in addition to typical metadata like what version you have to deal with, it lines out all of your dependencies in there as well. All of these dependencies got installed into the node modules directory. And if I had a better web connection, what I would do is I would delete that node modules directory and type in npm install, and you'd see all of it come right back down again. So the only way this is able to work is by having your dependencies in a file called package.json. But here's the deal. Let's look at something like, I don't know, jQuery. And what we end up finding here is that jQuery, a strictly client-side library, has adopted this standard, and they've included a package.json file as well. Because again, it does all of the things you would want to do. It gives metadata, it gives a version, it lets you know what the home page is for that, it lets you know authors, it lets you know the GitHub repo to find it in, keywords, bugs, licenses. Dependencies are runtime dependencies, and jQuery famously doesn't have any runtime dependencies. But if you wanted to pull it down and begin building it, what's cooler, these are the tools you'd need to use, and they use Grunt to build out their library. They use require.js to deal with dependencies. So that's jQuery. If we go looking for Backbone, another client-side library, but Backbone has a package.json as well to deal with its dependencies. Backbone does have a runtime dependency of underscore. So if you were to type in Bower install Backbone, it would install underscore as well because you have declared your dependencies. One more, I think you get the idea here. If we go looking for Angular, and we go looking at their, where are you at? There's their package.json right here. We can see that Angular is using this as well. And again, out of all the libraries out there, did you notice that all three of these libraries are using Grunt as their build tool? This is what helps me as well. As I go and look at these very popular libraries, I look at their package.json and I see what tools they're using. And that either lets me know that, yeah, I'm on the right track. If I choose Grunt, I've got 3 out of 3 so far that are also using Grunt. I've got the idea that this is a fairly popular build tool. But if I was going out and I found that they were all using some tool that I wasn't, that would give me pause, wouldn't it? That would say, what's wrong with them? Why are they wrong? Now, what it would make me think is maybe I'm choosing the wrong tool for the job. So having package.json available to you is helpful because it allows you to see what everyone is using. Now, Bower is for client side. So Bower.json is another file that you might have seen in many of those repos. If we come back up here, we're looking at Angular, and there's their Bower JSON. So these are now client-side dependencies. And if we go looking at Backbone, there's their Bower JSON file. And if we go looking at jQuery, there's their Bower JSON file. So what's nice about this Bower JSON is when you use that to install, jQuery is a great example. What it's going to do is it's going to pull in this repo, but it's going to ignore various directories and files. So when I do a Bower install jQuery, they're being very explicit that these are files that won't be included when I do a Bower install. So this is another common file that you can begin using to declare those kinds of things. So that's package and Bower. Bower has a nice .bower.rc file up there. You know, on Unix, anything that starts with dot is typically a hidden file. So we'll see several of these dot files are meant to be hidden normally. But if you wanted it to install somewhere other than Bower components, you could make that change here. Editor config is an interesting one. I wasn't aware of editor config before I started using Yeoman. And what it is it's a nice non-denominational way to start storing text editor and IDE settings. Like, do you want to use tabs or spaces? How many spaces do you want to use for indentions? Do you want to use curly brace styles, K&R styles? Do you want to use a lot of these things? And when you start looking at editor config and you start seeing all of the different tools out there that recognize that .editor config file, all of a sudden I'm interested. And this has taught me something that I wasn't using before, but I'm like, wow, when I see everyone that can use these things, and I'm already getting it for free, this is a tool that I might be interested in including on additional projects moving forward. It's yet another way to separate the wheat from the chaff, and out of those 69,000 projects, start finding some very interesting ones that you might not have stumbled across otherwise. So editor config is an interesting one. Git ignore if you're dealing with GitHub. I didn't say this, but you probably could tell by the error messages that all of these generators are stored up on GitHub, and they pull their dependencies from GitHub as well. So if GitHub is down or you don't have Git installed on your system, you're not going to get all this magic associated with it. But a .gitignore file is very nice because it says, here are files that I don't want to check in. It's not surprising that we're not checking in node modules. This is a very good practice. You should almost never check in node modules because you can simply type in npm install to get those dependencies back. So there's no reason to store those artifacts in source control somewhere when they're just an npm install away from coming back down. App Bower components and test Bower components as well. There's no need to check them into source control because you can type in a Bower install and reconstitute those very quickly. Of course, npm looks in package JSON for those files, and Bower looks in Bower JSON for those files. Yeah. So JS hint is a file that allows you to start dealing with coding conventions on your JavaScript. So it allows you to say, are we using camel case? Are we using curly braces? Are we using very things like this? I was already using JS hint, but if you're not, this is a library might be worth incorporating into your JavaScript life. Grunt file.js. This is the important one. This is our build script. So if I come over here to grunt file.js, we begin seeing that it requires in various tasks. This is a Node.js project. Anytime you see require, you know it's loading in modules. And then here's some settings. All right, my app is going to go in the app directory. My distribution is going to go in the dist directory. I don't have a dist directory right now, but if I type in grunt dist, it's going to package all those things. Yeah, I'm still in a bad shape. I keep hoping that it'll be well formed, and it's not. But yeah, this is where you could go in and change the port that it's running on, tweak your options, good things like that. So these are the directories in a nutshell: a directory for your app, a directory for your node modules, a directory for your tests, everything you would hope from a scaffolded app. Make sense? And that was just one generator. That was just that web app generator. We could turn around and install any number of generators out there. I mentioned Gulp. If I'm doing Ember, I could do yo install Ember. If I'm doing Backbone, I could say yo Backbone. So there are a lot of these different generators out there. Bootstrap is an interesting one because it's a lot lighter than the full web app one. So I've already installed this generator Bootstrap, but let me say yo Bootstrap, and let me see if I'll have better luck with this. It certainly has far less dependencies. So I'll come in here and make a Bootstrap directory, change into it, right? Nothing up my sleeve, and I'll say yo Bootstrap. What format do I want to use for the style sheets? I'll stick with plain old CSS, rock it old school. Come on, Git, you can do it. I'm not asking for very much. Ah, that's too bad. Well, you can see what would happen then is it would turn around and pull down just the bits I needed for Twitter Bootstrap. So this is what I would end up right here, just Bower components, just Bootstrap kind of pieces like this. No Grunt JS, no editor config, no JS hint, no anything like that. Generators can be as simple or as complex as you need them to be. But if you started with Bootstrap, maybe you would say Bower install jQuery to get jQuery after that. Then you would say Bower install underscore. And so you could start with a simple generator and then over time continue to add to this. And this is what I said at the beginning of this talk, is that this isn't just a one-time tool. This is a tool that you're going to use throughout the life cycle of your process as well. All right. It's easy peasy when you have an internet connection, that's for sure. Well, there are 20 or so Yo-sponsored generators that are written by the core contributors. But man, there are a ton of community generators floating around out there. And what's nice about these community generators, come on, you can do it, there we go. Oh, wow. Yeah, there are 648 generators now, all right? And so the nice thing about this is that there are all kinds of different community generators. One of the first things I was looking for were generators that would help me with my mean stack. And so by just typing in mean, I can see that there are a handful of different mean generators in there. If I'm interested in Angular, I've got a whole bunch of Angular generators out there. If I was interested in Mocha, I've got a number of different Mocha generators available to me as well. So it's really nice being able to just kind of come in here, explore, and poke around. It's as easy as installing one of them globally. If you like what it does, that's great. If you don't like it, uninstall it and move on to the next. So I've mentioned my Reveal.js generator. That's the slide deck I'm using right now. And so being able to go in and install my slide deck generator, once I've installed it, being able to go in and say, yo, reveal, and then it'll pull down all the pieces I need from that. Then on an ongoing basis, being able to say, yo, reveal slide, and give me a slide, and give me a slide, and give me a slide. Again, this is a lot more exciting if I live demoed it, but I've given up on GitHub at this point. But being able to yo reveal, which would scaffold things out for me, and then yo reveal slide, reveal slide, reveal slide, that allows me to build these things out on an ongoing basis. So, that is 1/3 of the equation, yo, the scaffolding part. Let's take an opportunity to take a look at Bower and see what that brings to the party. What's really interesting is that Bower was written by Twitter, just like Twitter Bootstrap. A lot of these organizations are founded on open source software. Google runs on Apache, right? Amazon runs on Apache. So it's not surprising that not only are these companies contributing to the Apache project, but they're turning around as they're building up their utilities, turning around and open sourcing it as well. Cassandra came out of Facebook. Thank you. So this was a tool they built up in-house, and they thought, well, this would probably help other people. Since everything else we're built on top of is open source, why don't we turn around and open source this as well and show that we're good community folks? Twitter is much the same way. So they've open sourced Twitter Bootstrap, and then Bower is their package manager. So if we go looking at Bower, we can see that it offers a nice, generic, unopinionated solution to the problems of front-end package management. Now, I'm a big fan of a library called Require.js. Are any of you using Require.js out in the field? It's good stuff, isn't it? But in order to use Require.js, your JavaScript libraries have to be written to be AMD enabled or Require.js enabled. It's not terrible. You just have to wrap it in a little bit of boilerplate code. But when you're trying to use just anyone's code out there, you begin seeing that's a little bit problematic. So Bower took a different approach. They're like, hey, guess what? If you type in Bower install jQuery, what we're going to do is we're going to look up on GitHub for a project called jQuery. And if there's a bower.json file, we will respect that file and we'll do whatever we have based on that. But if there isn't a Bower.json file, what we'll do is we'll just check out the master branch and we'll give you all of that code. So this is what they mean by an unopinionated framework. Bower install foo will install all of foo. But if there is a bower.json file up there, it'll install strategic portions of that foo project as we go along. So Bower is a really nice tool for just making it easy to pull any library, and regardless of whether it's Bower enabled or not. So the syntax, as you've seen, is Bower install. It'll look in your local Bower.json file, and that'll install all of the projects that are listed there. But you can also use it to install specific packages, Bower install jQuery. And you can use a hash notation down there to even install a specific version of that library. Of course, the version that you specify has to correspond to a GitHub tag or release so that we know how these things work together. But yeah, this is how you can turn around and begin installing specific versions of that particular library as well. Now that package could be something as simple as jQuery. But that's easy because they've registered that with the project so they know how to get to it. It could be just a random GitHub library. So you can use Bower to install anything out of a library, public or private. I get a lot of organizations say, I don't want to use Bower to install public libraries like Backbone and Underscore. I want them to install my private libraries, my private authentication or credit card libraries or things like that. Yeah, you can do that as well. Pass it a private GitHub repo, and as long as you're authenticated, you'll be just fine. But you know what? It doesn't even have to be a GitHub repo. That URL can point to anything. It can point to some zip file or tarball or anything you want out of this. This is what they mean by being unopinionated. It's just a simple way of saying, those files over here, move them over here into my project. So anything that you can remotely get, and by get I mean HTTP get, anything that you can remotely HTTP get can be a valid endpoint for Bower. Really nice. You also have the ability to search. Let's see if I have better luck searching. If I'm saying, I wonder if Backbone is available. Bower, search Backbone. There we go. Look at that. All kinds of projects related to backbone. So remember, we were going into NPM and searching there. Here we're doing these client-side things. So yeah, Bauer, what can you tell me about Ember? Oh yeah, lots of good Ember libraries out there. Bauer, what can you tell me about struts? Survey says. And if you want to begin using this, you can check in a bower.json file as well. It's a very simple file. Give it a name, give it a version, give it a description, give it your dependencies. And if you give it a file with dependencies in it, it will transitively install those as well. So when we saw the bower.json file over here in GitHub, not only is it not going to copy those files out of the repo, it's going to ignore them, it's going to also install Sizzle and require.js and QUnit and sign-on and things like that. Notice these are development dependencies. We don't have any runtime dependencies, but these are the developer dependencies as well. So if I did a Bower install, it would reach out and do all those dependencies. And of course, each one of these, if they have a Bower JSON, would transitively install their dependencies as well. So Bower is deceptively simple, but very capable as well. And if you want to get started with your own Bower JSON file, you can just type in Bower init, and it'll spin up a nice little wizard and walk you through it. We ought to be able to do that. Let's come over here and so if I do a Bower init, it's saying, okay, what's the name of my project? The name of my project is foo. What version is it? It's 0.1.1. What's the description? It's the most foolable project ever. All right, there we go. What's the main file? Server.js. What does it include? If I don't care about any of these, I won't install them. What are the keywords? Boo, bar, baz. There's my author. There's my license. I'm getting bored with this, right? Yeah. And they say, does that look good for you? Let me build out all this JSON for you. If you say yes, it writes it out. Now, if you want to do the same thing for package JSON, you can say npm init, and it'll do the same kind of thing. So what's my package? Foo, what's my version? What did I say? 0.1.1. What's the description? Foolable server-side goodness. All right. What's the entry point? Test command, get repo keywords. You get the idea. Does that look good? So now I have both a package JSON for all my server-side dependencies, and I have a Bower JSON for my client side. These are both JSON files, so you can certainly hand edit them, but it's always nice having those little utilities walking you through it. All right. Let's talk Grunt. So we've talked about Yo now, which is doing the scaffolding for us. We've talked about Bower, which is doing all of our client-side dependencies. Now we have Grunt, which is our build file. So Grunt is a build file written in JavaScript. It's very nice. I mean, there's something to be said. If you don't like JavaScript, you won't enjoy Grunt. But if you do enjoy JavaScript, there's something really nice about having your build system written in JavaScript and your client-side code in JavaScript and your server-side code, your Node.js code in JavaScript, and getting JSON out of Mongo or CouchDB, writing all of your MapReduce queries in JavaScript. The reason for Grunt's existence is that if you're an expert in that language, it's very nice having a JavaScript tool that allows you to do these basic things. But what's especially interesting about Grunt is all of the third-party plugins that come along for the ride as well. So it's not just that Grunt has a set of core tasks, it's that there are a bunch of libraries that you can turn around and install as well. I told you that if you go trawling around in GitHub and looking at all the libraries that you use, most of them are going to use Grunt script-based build tools. It's not the only one out there. Like I said, Gulp is another one. Volo is one that I used. I liked Volo because it was heavily invested in Require.js and AMD. But by using Volo as my build tool, I could only use other libraries that also participated in that kind of Require.js ecosystem. So when we were doing in-house development, that was great. It was very easy for us to begin including all of our different libraries. But if there are other libraries out there that didn't include it, we needed to pull them in, wrap them, do that kind of stuff. So a grunt file is nothing more than a module exports. If you've been doing any kind of Node.js development, this should feel very comfortable to you. If you want to bring in additional tasks, you simply require them in, and then away you go. So a Grunt.js file is just that, a JavaScript file, but more importantly, it's a Node module. So if you're doing NPM development, it's no different. So let's turn around and see what we have available to us from the command line. Normally, I would do this from... You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to throw caution to the wind here. I'm going to come into another project. This is a mean.io. This is something I talked about during my mean presentation. The only reason I'm coming in here is you'll notice it's got a bower.json file, it's got a package.json file, and it's got a grunt file in it as well. Rather than continuing to try to use that broken project, I figured I'd take you into a project that actually works. All right? So if I come in here right now and I ask it, what can I do? It'll be like, all right, here are all your available tasks. You can do a Grunt.js hint that will validate your files. I can do a Grunt Mocha test. I can do a Grunt Karma. I can do a Grunt env to set environment variables for these kinds of things. But many of these tasks aren't standard tasks. They got brought in through our requires. So if I start looking at this, it's saying, okay, well, I'm going to turn around and I'm going to read that package.json file. When I'm trying to watch various files, these are the Jade files I'm going to watch, and these are the JS files and the HTML and the CSS. What that means is if it sees any changes to any of these files, it'll automatically reboot the server, and so it constantly keeps my server up to date. Obviously, that's only interesting in development mode, not in production mode. But here's my JS hint task. Here's my node monitor task. As we go along in here, here's my Mocha test task. So you can see it's very easy for you to define these tasks and begin customizing them. And then loading these various tasks. This is where I got my Karma task from. This is where I got my concurrent task, and various things like that. So being able to not only load tasks from other things, but register tasks as well. So my default task now, if I just type in grunt and do nothing else, what it's going to do is the JS hint and concurrent project. If I said test, it's going to set the environment to the test environment and then run Mocha test and Karma unit. So what you have now are all the things you could normally do in Ant, different syntax, different language, but the same conceptual things. Being able to bring in third-party tasks and then register tasks with dependencies that will run before your task runs. So what else? Deployments. Are you trying to deploy your app to Heroku? Are you trying to deploy it to Cloud Foundry? Are you trying to deploy it to Amazon Web Services? Are you trying to deploy it to IBM Bluemix, right? You begin seeing now this idea behind generators makes it very easy for you to say, well, I'm going to take this meme stack and deploy it to Bluemix. Or I'm going to take this Angular stack and deploy it to Heroku. So these pluggable generators are not just about early stage things like scaffolding. And they're not about ongoing things like installing new libraries or new slides or things like that. They can really handle testing and deployment issues as well at the end of the day. So This deployment stuff, let me see if there's anything. Normally, I'd get really kind of cocky and actually do a remote deployment for you. But we weren't able to get a running app, so I'm certainly not going to deploy a broken app for you right there. But there are certainly lots of ways we can go in there, and once we have done all of our Git magic out of there, we could turn around and we could do a deployment and manage it that way. We're getting very close to the end of our time together here. So these plugins are available. If you're using CoffeeScript, of course you're going to want to bring in the CoffeeScript plugin that will compile all your stuff for you. If you're doing handlebars, that'll do your templating. If you're doing JS Hint, if you're doing Require.js or Sass or Stylus or Less or all these things, there are so many plugins available to you. There's almost not a need for you to write your own plugin. Although in-house, if you're trying to deploy to your own server with your own credentials and your own URL paths and things like that, that's when you would end up writing your own. But for all the major players out there, I'd install the Bluemix plugin, or I'd install the Heroku plugin, or the AWS plugin. So these plugins are available to you out on Grunt.js as well. You know, a mere 2,200 out there, but I'm sure if I went and looked at it right now, we would see significantly more. Let's find out. Showing 0 entries. There we go. Okay, so 2,700 instead of the 2,400 that we talked about before. So, or 2,200. So that's going up as well. So if we had more time, we would turn around. We would talk about how we could use this Uglify plugin. We would bring that thing in, and then we would register it. So we would npm install it. And notice what we're saying here by save dev. That is saving it to package JSON as a dev dependency. So it would automatically update that file for you. When you do a Bower install, it automatically updates that file for you as well. But once you had it installed, you would turn around and register those tasks so that your Grunt file knows about it and you could exercise it from there. So, Yeoman at the end of the day is a collection of 3 tools. Yo for scaffolding, Bower for client-side dependencies, and Grunt for builds. But these 3 tools work closely in cooperation with each other that allow you to bring in other libraries. And I think you've been able to see here that they allow you to bring in server-side dependencies and client-side dependencies. They help you at the beginning of your project as you're scaffolding things out. They help you throughout your project as you're bringing in new dependencies. And they help you at the end of your project as you're testing and deploying as well. But at the end,
Thank you, Scott. I want one more round of applause for Scott for a great session today.
Thank you.
I did like to thank all of you for participating in GIDS.web and Mobile Day. We are eager to hear your feedback. Tag your tweets and posts with #GIDS.